Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And I would be absolutely remiss if we did not take a moment of silence and acknowledge the horrific tragedy of last night in Washington, D.C. at Reagan National Airport. I'd like us to do that, please. Thank you. It kind of dovetails a little bit of why we're here today. Because when you think about what happened last night, people always say, well, it can't be me. Something like this can't happen to me. But when you think about a routine landing at one of the nation's busiest downtown airports and how that turned into absolute horrific tragedy, and then when you look at the events of why we're here today, people partying and celebrate on Bourbon Street, you say, well, nothing bad is going to happen to me. But it can happen indeed at any time when either government officials or private actors don't take the necessary steps to protect those that they are duty-bound to do. And so that's the little lesson that why we're here today is that it actually can happen to you, it could happen to you, and it does happen to you unless those steps are taken. And that's what brings us here, is that in the early morning hours of New Year's Eve in this city, imagine the energy, the excitement, and the joy of all the people who were celebrating not only for New Year's Eve, but also anticipating the Sugar Bowl just a day later with Georgia and Notre Dame. This is a location, Bourbon Street is a location where hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people come to party and regale every day, every week, every month, every year. And this is something that happens day after day. They celebrate life, they celebrate special events, they celebrate joy and happiness. Why? Because New Orleans told them it's okay to come and be who you want to be and celebrate the way you want to celebrate on Bourbon Street. That is as much of a sales pitch as what stays in Vegas or what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. New Orleans was making that pitch. City leaders, police leaders, security contractors, all of those that we have sued in our complaint, they knew. They always knew. They had actual notice. They knew those people were vulnerable and exposed to anybody who had the intent of driving around a lone police cruiser to cause mass carnage on that night. City leaders cared about how many visitors they could get into New Orleans, because tourism is one of the most important, if not the most important, tax generator in this city. They need it. The sales tax revenue, the national spotlight of the Sugar Bowl, the Super Bowl happening in a mere 10 days here. But what they did not care about that night was doing the right thing, the responsible thing. What they did not do was protect those who were vulnerable and exposed, and those were the pedestrians that they opened up Bourbon Street to. One cannot undertake the duty of hosting throngs of people and not protect them. If you do try to protect them, you cannot just do or try to do the minimum, bare minimum standards. You can't deviate from the public safety plan that was in place. You have to be able to stop the harm, like what happened here barely a month ago. Now, the city of New Orleans created the condition of a pedestrian-only thoroughfare, one of the most recognized streets in the world. They created Bourbon Street for the purpose of partying. They created Bourbon Street to place people on this street, not on the sidewalks, on the street. And that's why New Orleans undertook the duty to try to protect the people on this street, but failed miserably and in an outrageous way in doing so. This was foreseeable, predictable, and absolutely entirely preventable. Their trust in stepping into a crowded public place turned to horror, traumatic injuries, emotional trauma, death, and everyone's worst nightmare. And it never had to happen. If public safety officials, municipal leaders, city contractors had properly done their jobs, so many lives would never have been upended. My father, who is still doing great at 92 years old, doesn't miss a chance to say anytime he sees me, be careful. The people who were on Bourbon Street that night thought they were being careful because they were invited onto a street where they thought city leaders were there to protect them. But they didn't, and they failed. Those people thought that they were being careful. But indeed, the city of New Orleans and the contractors who had the duty to protect them, they let someone slip through that crack. And that was foreseeable. And look what it did. And honestly, folks, I don't think anyone should be shocked. So today, Romanucci and Blandon and Maples and Connick announced the filing of a lawsuit in the Civil District for the Parish of Orleans, State of Louisiana, against the City of New Orleans, the New Orleans Police Department, the French Quarter Management District, whose sole job was to improve public safety for the people of New Orleans and Bourbon Street, Mott McDonald, LLC, Hard Rock Construction, LLC, and another defendant for their respective roles in the preventable mass tragedy that occurred. The tragic event claimed the lives of 14 people, injured dozens, and left an indelible scar on those who were present and the broader public. The lawsuit was filed yesterday on January 29th and seeks justice for the victims and their families, holding those acceptable and responsible for their failure to protect the community despite clear warning signs and foreseeable risks. So I do want to introduce some of the people who are here today and who've had very important roles in seeing this lawsuit being filed and for our quest for justice and accountability. Now first, I want to introduce our local council partners, Aaron Maples and Brendan Connick, one standing to my left and other to my right, that you will hear from them today also. And then from the Romanucci and Blandon legal team in Chicago, I have Gina DeBoni, I have Patrick Huber, I have Sam Harton, and I have Michael Ceresa here from Romanucci and Blandon. And of course, I think you've met Jennifer McGuffin, who is our communications officer. The horrific events in the early hours of New Year's were the predictable, entirely preventable result of a chain of events which were initiated by the actions and inactions taken by all of the defendants that we have named. So for nearly a decade, New Orleans elected officials and public safety employees, along with their hired contractors, knew of the risk to the French Quarter. That's why we keep saying it was foreseeable, because they knew. There have been other such incidents, not only in the United States, but around the world, which caused the city of New Orleans to protect the people on Bourbon Street because of the actions they took to close it off to public traffic. They knew at all times, and they made conscious choices that were foreseeably flagrant. Following the deadly Bastille Day tragedy in Nice, France, for example, on July 14th, 2016, in which a driver drove a box truck on the Promenade des Anglais, city centers all around the world, including New Orleans, were placed on alert for copycats. New Orleans utilized $40 million in taxpayer money to purchase and install the equipment needed to keep its residents and visitors safe. New Orleans, with the help of their hired consultants and contractors, recklessly and willfully put the New Year's celebrants at risk by focusing on reconstruction of the safety systems to be ready for the Super Bowl at the expense of the crowd that was on Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve. Super Bowl is a bigger audience, tens of millions of people. New Year's Eve on Bourbon Street is not televised, but still has many dozens and hundreds of innocent souls. The city deviated from its own public safety plan for New Year's Eve and the Sugar Bowl, for that matter, a decision that completely exposed Bourbon Street. The defendants gave the opportunity to a dangerous person intent upon taking innocent lives and depriving the public's right to be safe from violence. All of these actors must be held accountable for the massacre on Bourbon Street on New Year's Day 2025. So now this lawsuit underscores that this tragedy was not an unavoidable act of violence, but the result of a pervasive systemic failure by those entrusted with safeguarding the public, who had been given detailed warnings of the risk in public places such as Bourbon Street. Residents and visitors trusted New Orleans. They trusted the officials that they elected. They trusted the contractors that these officials hired to keep them safe. It's deeply troubling that municipal leaders and contractors were clearly aware of the vulnerability of Bourbon Street to this type of predictable and foreseeable event. Our clients' lives are forever changed, and we will hold all of them responsible to account for this harm. So I leave you, before I turn it over to Aaron Maples, I leave you with a couple of thoughts. How could New Orleans protect the souls that they invited to Bourbon Street to celebrate if they did not even know that they had the ability to protect them? And you know what I'm talking about. The answer is simple. They couldn't. They had the means to do it. They didn't even know they had the means to do it. You can't protect that way. You cannot protect by omission. And you may ask, how is the city of New Orleans liable, or for that matter, any of the other defendants, for the acts of a criminal who has contempt? That's a real question, and it's a serious one, and it's one that you should be asking. Well, the answer is easy. The law states that if a criminal's actions were foreseeable at the time of any of these defendants' negligent conduct, their own conduct, the criminal act is not superseding. Plain and simple. So what happened? Literally, the keys were handed to Jabbar to carry out this tragedy. They were handed to him. And so now I'd like to introduce our partner, Aaron Maples.
Thank you, Tony. Allow me to begin by stating that it is an honor to speak to you today on behalf of the individuals that we have the privilege of representing in this litigation. It is our sincere hope that through this lawsuit we will bring change and make this city a better and safer place for its citizens and those we invite to visit. I'd like to now walk you through the details of the incident that took place on January 1st of 2025. It should have been a time for renewal and celebration in the city of New Orleans in the early morning hours on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2025. Just hours earlier, thousands of people descended on the French Quarter to ring in 2025 with their friends and family. Fans of the University of Georgia and Notre Dame flanked Bourbon Street, prepared to cheer on their teams in the Sugar Bowl, which was set to take place later that day just down the street in the Superdome. Little did they know that soon their lives would be forever changed. Minutes after 3 a.m. on New Year's Day, Shamsuddin Jabbar approached the intersection of Canal and Bourbon Street in a Ford F-150 rented through the car-sharing service Turo. And as he passed the far end of the intersection, guarded at the time by only a single New Orleans police Ford Explorer cruiser, he turned right, jumped the curb, passed by Walgreens Pharmacy, and sped down Bourbon Street, striking, killing, and maiming scores of people until he was fortuitously stopped by a construction crane and ultimately shot by the police. It goes without saying that the city of New Orleans is forever changed as a result of this tragedy. And we've seen countless people now change their behavior and avoid not only Bourbon Street, but the city itself out of fear for their own personal safety. Further, in addition to those left to mourn the loss of their loved ones, and those who now begin the long road towards recovery from life-changing injuries, it is impossible to quantify just how many people now suffer from crippling depression, anxiety, and nightmares from what they saw and heard during this incident. Simply put, it is impossible to quantify this tragedy's astounding impact on this community. And with that, I'll turn it over to my law partner, Mr. Brendan Connick. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As Aaron said, my name is Brendan Connick, and I'll reiterate that we are honored to represent the victims and their families in this case. Currently, the plaintiffs in this matter are Antoinette Klima, who is here today as a parent and legal guardian of her minor son, Elle Isley, Steele Adelson, Daniel Ortega, Jacob Wilson, Leo Spadoni, Jessica Wilson, Nakia Brock, Jamarco White, Cody Lanansa, Daniel Benke, Lacey Brabham, Thomas Trussell, John Reese, Keith Eldridge, Nina McCracken, Harodasha Marrero, Laura Norman, Carla White Hall, Brittany Ward, and Adele Strong. All of these plaintiffs have been traumatized and forever changed by this tragic event. Of particular note is the son of Antoinette Klima and Reggie Hunter. Reggie died in this attack. He is remembered as the life of the party and someone with a big heart who was funny, loving, and caring. While many will miss his big smile and caring ways, the hole left in the life of Reggie's oldest son can never be replaced. Let me tell you the story about Elle Isley and Steele Adelson. Elle is a native of Fort Myers, Florida. She travels to New Orleans with her family and friend, Steele, to cheer on Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Elle is a freshman at the University of Georgia, and her friend Steele is a freshman at San Diego State University. They went to Bourbon Street to celebrate New Year's Eve and get ready for the Sugar Bowl the next day. It's around 3:12 a.m. when Elle and Steele meet up with a group of friends and begin walking down Bourbon Street. At that same time, a white truck comes speeding down Bourbon Street and hits their group directly, throwing them violently through the air. The boys that they were with are killed. In the days following the incident, Steele meets the police officer who carried her to the ambulance that night. She learns that all the people he cared for, she is the only one that survived. Neither Elle nor Steele can return to school this semester. Instead, they are forced to remain homebound as their bodies and minds begin the long road to recovery. The citizens of New Orleans and the people who visit this city deserve better than what the officials provided on New Year's Eve. There is no doubt that this tragedy was preventable and that the safety measures put in place to protect us from this incident failed us. As a native New Orleanian, I can tell you that I absolutely love this city and all that comes with it. But it is time that we take a stand and demand that our leaders be proactive rather than reactive. We can't keep being asked to be resilient and to put our trust in leadership that is going to wait for the levees to break instead of checking for cracks. Changes need to be made in this city so that this type of preventable trauma never happens again. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Sarasa.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm going to walk you through the complaint and the counts that have been brought against all defendants included herein. The defendants' actions, as outlined in the complaint, were negligent, willful, outrageous, and reckless. They failed to act on clear, credible warnings to public safety and in popular pedestrian gathering spaces. It is deeply troubling that not only was there a lack of a reliable safety plan for Bourbon Street, but also there was no suitable backup plan that would prevent a large-scale tragedy such as this. The actions or failure to act by all defendants enabled this tragedy to take place. Each defendant created the environment for the events that happened on January 1st of 2025. First, the city of New Orleans so recklessly and outrageously mismanaged the timing of the bollard replacement system project with a singular focus on the Super Bowl preparedness that it left the obvious and significant target night of New Year's and the Sugar Bowl badly exposed to a foreseeable event. Second, the New Orleans Police Department willfully, outrageously, and recklessly failed to implement and failed to follow their own written security measures to secure Bourbon Street and to provide a safe and secure environment for all patrons on New Year's Day. Third, the French Quarter Management District willfully and recklessly failed in its stated mission in its bylaws to improve public safety in the district, which includes Bourbon Street, by recklessly failing to implement reasonable safety and security measures along Bourbon Street and recklessly enacting a replacement project for a failed system without any interim or backup measures, exposing New Year's and the Sugar Bowl celebrants to unnecessary risk. Fourth, Mott McDonald, the engineering consultant that was hired by the city, negligently designed a security plan recommending and implementing poorly designed and manufactured bollard and wedge systems that would not withstand the reasonably foreseeable abuse and wear and tear that any system would be exposed to from the dirt and debris and road traffic in a busy, crowded environment like Bourbon Street and the French Quarter. And lastly, Hard Rock Construction, the city's chosen contractor for the implementation of the original bollard system and the reconstruction that was enacted in 2024, they implemented a program and a replacement timeline beginning on November 18th, 2024, with the singular focus of being complete for the Super Bowl in February, and left Bourbon Street completely exposed on New Year's Eve and for the Sugar Bowl without any backup systems, without any interim systems, and without any reasonable precautions taken to protect the people that were on Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve. In more detail, the counts in the civil complaint against each defendant include negligence against the city of New Orleans, negligence against the French Quarter Management District, negligence against the New Orleans Police Department, negligence against Mott McDonald, and negligence against Hard Rock Construction. I'm now going to introduce you and turn this over to one of our clients, a very brave woman, Antoinette Klima, to say a few words, followed by fellow Romanucci and Blandon attorneys Gina DeBoni, Sam Harton, and Patrick Huber, which will read statements from other of our clients who could not be here today.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I am the mother of a young boy who tragically lost his father, Reggie Hunter, in this recent incident. I've had the privilege of knowing Reggie for nearly 20 years. Throughout our relationship, one thing that we always agreed upon was that we would give our son a better life than what we had. And like most other parents, we wanted more for him, more opportunities, more experiences, and more joy. And for us, that meant soccer practice, learning foreign language, joining the chess club, band rehearsals, and if you know anything about band, there's a lot of chaotic noises that come out of those instruments. But most recently, our son expressed his desire for a motorcycle for Christmas. And that was a gift that Reggie and I had, neither one of us had ever had. And after saving and planning, we decided to make it happen. And on Christmas Day, as our son received his motorcycle, I was on FaceTime with Reggie, sharing that moment with him. And little did I know that that would be the last time that we ever spoke. And that would be the last time that our son would see his father. On New Year's Day, I received the heartbreaking call that Reggie did not survive. Telling our son that his father was gone was the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And look, I've been through a lot in my life. I've survived Hurricane Katrina. I've lost loved ones before. And I've even waded through waist-deep water to get my grandfather out of his flooding home. And still, nothing compares to the pain of losing Reggie and having to break the news to our son. Even yesterday was our son's 12th birthday. That's his first birthday without his daddy. You know, our son has been robbed of so many milestones. A father's presence at his first dance, his first kiss, learning to drive, graduating, getting married. The list goes on and on. It's endless. I don't know if this pain will ever fully go away. People say it gets easier, but I'm not sure at this point. What I do know is that we have to find a way to move forward. We must find accountability, seek justice, and work to ensure that no child ever has to suffer like this again due to senseless violence. Thank y'all.
I will now read to you the words of Leo Spadoni, who survived the attack. Before that fateful night on New Year's in New Orleans, I was filled with hope and optimism of our city's future. I felt secure and looked forward to each day, appreciating the vibrant community around me. That moment changed everything. In an instant, my sense of safety was shattered. The joy I once felt was replaced by a pervasive fear. The city that I once loved and felt a part of now feels like a place of danger and dread. This fear has made me apprehensive about venturing out and living a fulfilling life of enjoyment. The truck plowing through people not only ruined lives, but also struck an incomprehensible fear in our hearts. How could the city let this happen to people who are simply there to celebrate? Who can we hold accountable for this catastrophe? The weight of loss is immense, and some families will never receive their loved ones back. It is crucial that those responsible are held accountable. Justice must be served for the lives lost and for the fear instilled in our community. It is only through accountability that we can hope to reclaim a sense of safety and begin to heal. As a community, we must stand together and demand justice and accountability to find our way back to normalcy.
I will read you the words of Daniel Ortega, who survived the attack. I am Daniel Ortega, and I am a victim of the January 1st, 2025 incident that took place in New Orleans. I've never been a person to travel away from home to experience New Year's Eve in a popular location until this particular year, because I've always feared large groups of people. Unfortunately now, due to this unfortunate incident, I can honestly say that I will live the rest of my existence hidden away from any event that draws attention to crowds of people. I used to love attending concerts and college football games with friends, although even with my fear of something of this magnitude occurring, my love for football and concerts always prevailed. So I was extremely excited for New Year's Eve in New Orleans, since it would be my first big experience away, excited for New Year's Eve, celebrating the new year. During the incident, I felt shock and numbness all over, to where I felt like I could not breathe and like I could not move. Since being traumatized by this event, I have experienced depression, anxiety, and an overwhelming amount of fear. I've had nightmares that caused me to go endless nights without sleep and continue to prevent me from attending public places during busy hours. I pray that all those responsible will take accountability. Take accountability for this tragedy, and I hope that justice prevails, so that innocent people never have to live their lives in trauma, never have to live their lives in fear, like I did, and like everyone else did that was involved in this event. Patrick?
I will read you the words of Keith Eldridge, who survived the attack. I traveled to New Orleans for the first time on December 31st to celebrate my 60th birthday, which was on New Year's Day. I happened to be on the 300 block of Bourbon Street at the time of this horrific incident. This tragic event has affected me so deeply that it stays on my mind every day, morning, afternoon, and evening. I have continuous flashbacks and no longer want to be in large crowds or events. I don't think I will ever visit Bourbon Street again, let alone return to New Orleans. The safety protocols that were in place were not sufficient. They were not sufficient to protect people, and I truly hope that all those responsible learn from this tragedy and prevent anything like it from ever happening again.
I will now read the statement of Lacey Brabham. My life is forever changed since the tragic event on New Year's in New Orleans. Those terrifying moments, all I could think about was my children having to live their lives without me. I didn't know if at any moment I would be lying lifeless in the street or if I would live to see another day. I will never be the same. I cry every day, and every time I close my eyes, I see what I saw that night. I'm scared to leave home. I'm scared to say goodbye to my loved ones because I feel like I might never see them again. Our plan for New Year's was to celebrate New Orleans and start a year full of joy and blessings. In an instant, our lives changed forever. All I can think of is the poor, lifeless souls who just seconds before were celebrating with us, and now covered with sheets, never to see another day. It's tragic.
Before we take a couple of questions, you can see how emotional it is, not only for Antoinette to say what she did. I mean, I don't know, I had to hold back myself listening to Antoinette. But we all know that life brings death, and it brings it in different ways. But here, as in what happened last night, when it's so quick and without warning, and when the actors knew that it was foreseeable and preventable, that's what causes us to be here. People say, why do you sue? I'm the lawyer, but why do our clients sue? It's because of that very reason. It's because when it was foreseeable, when it was preventable, when people knew, municipalities knew, corporations knew, and they failed to act or did their job in a bad way, that's why we're here. If I invite you to my house and I don't shovel my front driveway and I don't take the tree stump that's blocking the front door and the gutter is dripping and I do everything I can to not make it safe for you to come into my home, I'm responsible. And that's exactly what happened here, folks. These defendants that we've sued, they are responsible. They are legally liable. We'll take questions. Yes, sir.
The suit portrays the FQMB as being a responsible party for the flawed construction plan that was in progress on the attack. What is the basis for that characterization? For example, are they signatories on documents for the construction plan, or what was their role exactly in the construction?
So I may give you the first part of the answer, then I may turn it over to one of my colleagues. But clearly we know that they were responsible for the public safety plan. They were responsible for the design, the implementation of it. So being a separate entity, they have liability. They are a cause of what happened here. This is going to be a jigsaw puzzle. We're going to be seeing that you're going to see many different facets of responsibility, maybe even more than what we've sued here today. Okay, this is the beginning of peeling back the onion layers. So with the French Management Quarter District, they have a piece of this. Michael, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not.
The French Quarter Management District was created in part by the state of Louisiana to oversee and implement security measures in the French Quarter. As we stated earlier, this was a long build-up process of the French Quarter Management District retaining consultants to develop security plans that ultimately led to where we are today. And they hold a huge piece of the puzzle, as Tony said, in terms of how we got to the place where Bourbon Street was exposed on New Year's Eve. And we believe that as the case progresses, the evidence is going to show that they were intimately involved in that process.
There's a lot of shared responsibility here, where there is not one entity or person or government municipal agency that's solely responsible here. There's a lot of different pieces that come together. And I hate going back always to aviation, but very typically in aviation disasters, there's never one single cause for that plane to have crashed. There's always multiple factors in place. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between your lawsuit and the lawsuit filed by Morris Park? What will be the relationship between the court and what some of the evidence they have documents?
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak to whether their lawsuit, how it compares to ours, because I don't know. Ours is unique. I mean, ours is one that we've crafted on our own. But certainly, Morris Bart's lawsuit, and I'm sure there will be others that will be filed. There's nothing that I would anticipate other than cooperation and maybe even some sort of consolidation for discovery purposes. But certainly we want to cooperate with anybody who is also undertaking their own investigation. Yes, ma'am. With regard to your first question, a specific number, there's never a number that we could have in mind here, because this is truly and honestly speaking, the losses here are immeasurable. When you're talking about death never being able to see the things that Landon will ever be able to experience with his father, or hospitalization for a month and then rehabilitation for 6 months. How you measure those harms, it's going to be very difficult, but we have ways to do that. And it's going to take time to develop that through, for example, life care planners and economists and physiatrists and doctors who will help us measure some of those economic losses. The non-economic ones, such as pain and suffering and emotional distress and grief and sorrow, those are very difficult to measure, and those are usually best left to a jury. Oh, do I, right, see, I got away from myself. I would anticipate more plaintiffs. We are talking to additional people, and I know that there are others out there, so I would anticipate there will be more people that would be joining, whether it's with us or the other firm or even with other firms. I would certainly anticipate that. I'm sorry. I saw your hand first.
You guys are a Chicago-based firm. Why was it important for you guys to partner up with Maples Connick and bring this here in New Orleans, since you guys are Chicago-based?
So I'm gonna turn that over to Aaron and Brendan, because I would like them to speak to that. I think that's fair.
Sure. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate the question. I think it's a fair one. You know, I think the best way to answer that question is to describe a little bit about how our firm originally got involved in this case. You know, we saw very on, kind of what everybody else did, that something wasn't right. And so, you know, we were watching the news articles come out and started to get the feeling that this was preventable. And it just so happened that in the days after the incident took place, we were contacted by an individual who was there that night, who suffered injuries, who was in need of immediate medical treatment, and who had no means or access to health care. And it was at that time that we really began our investigation. And within hours of research, we came to the one and only conclusion that there is, and that's that this is an entirely, or was an entirely preventable incident. That the city knew about this for nearly a decade, that the city spent $40 million of taxpayer funds to try to implement measures and mechanisms to prevent this type of incident, and yet when the time came that they were needed, that they were nowhere to be found. And so we at that point realized that you know, after we announced that we were going to be looking into this, the flood of calls from folks just like that individual that originally contacted us was overwhelming, to be quite honest. And you know, we were fortunate to be put in contact with the Robinucci and Blandon firm, who is a firm that specializes in handling these exact types of cases all over the country. And the benefits of partnering with them has just been immeasurable. It's our goal to provide our clients with the absolute best legal representation that we can, and we believe that we are doing so by partnering with this esteemed firm.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, you know, just because we're based in Chicago, our practice is national, and I care about the people that I live with in my city as much as the people that I visit in other cities. I care about all humanity, and everybody on our team feels the exact same way, and that's why we're partnered up with these fine people, is because we all care. I don't anticipate, look, I can't speak to what the court is going to do when they see a number of complaints. We will abide by whatever the courts feel is best, and we will follow their lead. I don't anticipate this being dragged out or delayed at all because there are multiple lawsuits. If anything, there should be efficiencies because we're going to be able to cooperate and maybe share in the same type of discovery. So I don't anticipate being slowed down one bit. Yes, ma'am.
We've spoken to legal experts throughout the past month, of course, because anticipated
Yeah, there are immunities. Municipalities across the country have a number of immunities, and we're very familiar with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why our firms are together, is because of our experience in fighting municipalities. Municipalities do not have what's called absolute immunity. Their immunity is limited to a certain type of conduct. And you've heard us here, I think it was Michael who referenced what type of immunities they don't have if they engage in conduct that is either reckless or, I forgot what other words he used, but I know that usually it's willful conduct, reckless conduct, conscious disregard conduct, indifference. So if you engage in that type of conduct, your immunities don't exist. Yes, sir.
Notoriously unflexible when it comes to these types of suits. How would you be able to compel that payment should you get a positive report?
That is not anything that we're looking at right now. It's certainly an issue that we'll have to face down the road, but right now we have to get answers. We have to understand why it happened, because just like with any other tragedy, if we don't learn from it and if we don't force people to make changes that will protect those who are vulnerable and exposed and who didn't know that they were being exposed, then there will be no change.
One final question, please.
Okay, so the,
Make it two. I don't think this, did you raise your hand? No, that was.
the suit describes the previous bollard system, the field matadors, as poorly designed and manufactured. To what extent has there been any investigation thus far of liability being on the manufacturer and design of those bollards versus the city's responsibility to maintain them?
So it's gonna be a two-parter again. I may defer to my colleague. We know that there was a manufacturer and a designer, and that's what we're looking into, whether or not they will be feasible to be brought into, because they have a significant say on how the installation process is, right? We had an installer here in New Orleans, but there was a designer and manufacturer that was not in New Orleans. So that is something we're looking at, and whether or not they actually become a party to this suit, it's to be determined. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, real briefly, I think Tony very well said that this is the beginning of the process. And we anticipate that there may be other parties involved, both on the plaintiff side and the defense side. And our goal here, and it has been since the very beginning, is to find the responsible parties and hold them accountable and find justice.
Okay, that's our quick follow-up. Has it been ruled out that the city would have been liable to maintain that system, or is that still a question being spoken?
I think that's still a question, because like I said earlier, there are pieces to the puzzle here, and we don't have to find the sole primarily responsible party here. If one is a cause, then that's what we need to show here. So they could all be causes and all share that responsibility. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your time here today.